Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Audrey Lichter, Executive Director of Chai Mitzvah, the Resource Center for Jewish Engagement. Today's Scholars Circle topic is From Bukhara to Jerusalem, Part 2, Israel After 10/7 Through a Sephardic Lens, with Menashe Chaimov. Chai Mitzvah is a national organization now celebrating its 17th year. We are the host of Scholars Circle, a Jewish resource center that focuses on building community through Jewish engagement programs. We have over 20 curricula tailored for small group conversations for teens and adults, which can be lay or professionally led. For more information, please visit our website at chaimitzvah.org. The Scholars Circle program was inspired by Scott Shea, our founder and board president, who authored the best-selling book Conspiracy U, A Case Study, which unpacks anti-Zionism conspiracy theories from the left and the right political spectrum. The curriculum was also taught in a recorded session by Dr. Andrew Pessin, which is also available on our website. The Scholars Circle program hosts lectures by prominent scholars every 2 weeks on topics related to Israel and the Jewish community, geared towards rabbis, educators, and lay leaders who are charged with explaining the complex issues facing the Jewish community. To that end, each lecture will have a resource guide that will be mailed to you after the lecture. A recording of each lecture will be accessible on our website and shared with you through email as well. We are excited to continue the Scholars Circle program, and we need your support to keep it thriving. Scholars Circle has engaged well over 4,000 participants since 10/7. We are embarking on a new venture. We would like to invite you to sponsor a lecture in honor or memory of a person or organization and tell us about that honoree, which we will acknowledge during our introductory remarks. Sponsorships are $500 per lecture. 100% of this donation will go directly to our brave and dedicated scholars who commit their lives, often at great difficulty and sacrifices on campuses these days, to the study of Israel and anti-Zionism. Your donation will enable us to continue bringing international scholars to you at no charge to share their experience on the evolving Jewish world in the aftermath of October 7th. Thank you to all who have already contributed. We are grateful to the Laboratory for the Study and Prevention of Global Anti-Semitism at the University of Connecticut for their generous support. For more information about the laboratory, you can contact Professor Dan Wiener, Vice Provost for Global Affairs and Professor of Geography, or Professor Jessica Cooperman, Head of UConn Center for Judaic Studies and Contemporary Jewish Life. To make a donation, please visit chaimitzvah.org and click on the gold menu tab, Scholars Circle, and select Support Scholars Circle. This will be included in our follow-up email as well. Thank you for considering supporting this engaging program. Today's scholar is Menashe Chaimov, who is the founder and CEO of SAMI, Sephardic American Mizrahi Initiative, which is dedicated to fostering the Sephardic and Mizrahi ecosystem on college campuses nationwide. He is an adjunct professor teaching Bukharian Jewish history and culture at Queens College, with roots tracing back to Samarkand, Uzbekistan, where his ancestors lived for over 2,000 years. Recognized for his contributions, he received the Person of the Year Award by the Bukharian Jewish Congress of USA and Canada, New York Jewish Week's 36 Under 36, and the Times Ledger newspaper's Queen's Impact Award. In 2025, Menashe was selected as one of 15 Jewish professionals for Class 9 of the Wexner Field Fellowship, Premier Leadership Program, in partnership with the Jim Joseph Foundation, and that same year received the Covenant Pomegranate Prize for Jewish Educators. We welcome audience questions anytime. Please use the Zoom Q&A box. Menashe, welcome to Scholars Circle.
Audrey, thank you very much for such a great introduction and for all of the work that you're doing. This is an incredible cause, and I wish that more and more people be able to know more about it and definitely support it and participate it. Thank you very much for everybody who tuning in and joining us where I am right now on the East Coast in Miami. It's at 12 o'clock, and I'm sure people are from all around the world. So today we are talking about Israel from the Sephardic lens. And this particular topic got to be introduced for a very specific reason. As you already heard from Audrey, I'm currently a founder and CEO of an organization called SAMI, which stands for Sephardic American Mizrahi Initiative. And I'm also an adjunct professor of Bukhara Jewish history at Queens College. However, after October 7th, when a lot of our students, they, were part of uncertainty on college campuses that was happening with many other students. And we as an organization really quickly decided not to do anything around Israel, particularly because we saw there's other partners who have much larger, bigger budgets and bigger organization and been in the field for much longer than us, be able to do that type of a work. And at that time, we realized and we said, okay, all we're going to do, we're going to support our students and we're going to refer our students and navigate the situation as much as we can because there was a lot of uncertainties and a lot of things that we did not know. However, after a month, exactly a month, we noticed something interesting. And we noticed that our students standing on the front lines and defending Jewish people, defending themselves and defending Israel, while at the same time not being equipped with certain information. And there was a big educational gap. What we saw that there was one part that was missing, and that was missing is the narrative about talking about Israel from the Sephardic lens. We realized that when our students were being told, go back to Russia, or go back to Ukraine, or go back to your country, while they replied back and said, I would like to go back to Syria, that's where I'm from, but I really can't. Or I would like to go back to Iraq, but my family were kicked out from that country. So, well, it made us rethink about the work that we're doing and said, okay, maybe we need to provide an educational curriculum or educational program that is not only educating Sephardic students, which we did that successfully, but also opens up for the larger audience and be able to educate others. And I personally went on a tour around the country in November, and I was be able to share this on many different college campuses around the country. And you could read more about it on the resource guide about everything that we're going to be talking today. Some of the information was published in different articles. So let's delve in and learn about Israel from the Sephardic lens. What we're going to talk about, what is Zionism. What do we know about Zionism? What Zionism is from Sephardic lens. What did that really means? Why Israel is so complicated? A lot of times when you ask about Israel, people say it's complicated. Who are indigenous to the land of Israel? We're also going to talk a little bit about how we ended up in the land of Israel and why we're having so many challenges when we're talking about that particular land. So I always like to begin, and those of you who've been to my previous session, the part one, you already heard some of this information. And those of you who are just tuning in, I just want to introduce to you who I am and how I started this work. I began this work simply by asking questions. And the question I asked was why? Why am I Bukharian if I'm not from Bukhara? I'm from Samarkand. Bukhara is a city in Uzbekistan. Samarkand is a city in Uzbekistan. But how is it that I am, as a Bukharian Jew, identify by a specific city or by a specific region rather than by the country itself? Usually when I do this live, we'll be able to play this game when I would ask you, a Jew from Russia is Russian Jew. A Jew from Syria is Syrian Jew. A Jew from Iraq is Iraqi Jew. But a Jew from Uzbekistan, most of you probably just said an Uzbeki Jew. However, there is no people that identify as Uzbeki Jew. Jews who come from Uzbekistan identify as Bukharian Jews. And that was my questions. And I constantly start asking myself, who were my grandparents? How do we even got the name Chaimov? And as you see over here, that's me, Menashe Chaimov, my father, Abrash Chaimov. Then my grandfather right next to him is Menashe Chaimov, who I was named after. But something interesting I discovered there, the name was Elik Boshi. And Elik Boshi means being a leader of 50 families. So then I went further and tried to identify who was his father. And his father was Hanan Chai Chaim of Elik Boshi. So the part Chai I found, which wasn't there before. Then I went further and Shalom Chai Chaim of Elik Boshi. So now everything kind of puts into perspective. Now we have 4 different titles there. And then later on, the latest generation I was be able to find was Chaim Chai Pri. So Chaim Chai Pri is where our family derives from, our last name derives from the name Chaim, or it could be from the nickname of Chai. And usually people would receive nicknames as Chai is when there is a lot of mortality of the children in the family, and to make the child to live, we would give him a name as Chai, a life, be able to, sustain. And that's, you'll be able to see it there. And through this process, I learned about that my family were merchants, they were rabbis, they were community organizers, they were teachers. And something I discovered that I would like to leave all of you, if anything that you need to remember from this presentation today, and just remember this. I believe that the single most important thing that you can do for your family, maybe the simplest of all, is to develop a strong family narrative. Knowing your heritage gives an individual a tremendous amount of confidence, sense of belonging, and a foundation for its identity. And today, by learning and continue wanting to come to be part of this type of circles to learn more about it, you're actually advancing this mission and advancing this idea. So like I said, why am I Bukhara and not Bukhara? This very question got me to be able to present about my identity and where I come from around the world and share this with a lot of people around the world and on different type of platforms. I also truly believe that learning about Bukharian Jewish history, you consequently learn about Jewish history as a whole. And that's, we'll be able to prove on, and you'll be able to look at part 1 and really understand what I'm describing here. A little bit about my organization. Sephardic American Mizrahi Initiative is a national 501c3 organization. We're currently on 16 campuses around the country. We're in 6 different states, and we're engaging over 5,000 Jewish students on campus. Primarily, we're focusing on Sephardic and Mizrahi students around the country, but most of the students that come to us also come from different variety of Jewish communities, but also from non-Jewish communities as well, and they feel very confident and comfortable being part of the organization and our programming. All right, what are your burning questions? This is an opportunity for you to put out all your questions that you have, and by the end of the session, we promise Audrey and I, we're going to be reading it and answering all of them. So put your burning questions now, because I know as a professor in college, if my students have questions, they sit throughout the whole session not hearing anything that I tell them. Why? Because they don't want to forget that question. So my suggestions for you, put that question out there, let's forget about it, and then we'll come back to it close to the end of the session. I also like to show maps, because maps are important to understand geographically what region we're talking about. If you see over here in yellow, UZB, that's Uzbekistan. Right next to it is Turkmenistan. On top of it is Kazakhstan. To the right, Kyrgyzstan, and then Tajikistan. That's border with China. And then a small part of Afghanistan. All of this region would be considered to be where the Bukharian Jewish community comes from. So what is Zionist? When we ask this question, I always say it depends who you ask. And this is something that I would like to show you to really understand when we're talking about Zionism from Sephardic lens, what it actually means. Again, if we would do this in a live session, we would be able to communicate, and we would be able to read everything that I'm doing. But I'm going to do everything for you. So I put together a different terminology of Zionism. Okay, and the reason why I do that is because now imagine when you go on college campus, or if you're talking with anybody, how difficult it is to understand what Zionism is when you're putting into the words. So from ADL website, we got Zionism is a movement for the self-determination and statehood for the Jewish people in their ancestral homeland, the land of Israel. the vast majority of Jews around the world feel a connection or kingship with Israel, whether or not they explicitly identify as Zionists, and regardless of their opinion on policies of the Israel government. So it really encompasses basically saying every single Jew there's out there that feel that whether or not he agrees or disagrees, it's Zionist, right? So that's the whole concept, and also it's a movement of self-determination that we be able to self-determine ourselves in that land. I still have challenge with this terminology because that might mean to me that it could be in any other land, even though they mentioned here for the Jewish people in their ancestral homeland. So it actually mentions that we're talking about Israel as their ancestral homeland. So it's not self-determination anywhere around the world, but in that specific land. Okay. Now I pulled that out from Al Jazeera. A colonial movement supporting the establishment by any means necessary of a national state for Jews in historic Palestine. Zionism is a nationalist political ideology that called for creation of Jewish state and now supports the continued existence of Israel as such a state. Okay, so it's interesting, right? The way the format here of the definition comes from a colonial movement. So right away it connects to what? Where else do we see a colonial movement language? When we talk about Europeans conquering, when Europeans came to United States, where there was a United States, so these lands, it was a colony, right? It was the Great Britain colonized, or Spanish people colonized this land and moved out the Native Americans and therefore took it over. So now we see this straight connection to the Western ideology of any type of connection to the when we're talking about land. Then we see a movement supporting establishment by any means necessary. Now it shows you that, hey, there is a genocide, there is a killing, you want to do it by any means, you're going to do it. National state for the Jewish of historical Palestine. So, and then I was saying, oh, it's a historical Palestine. So they want to do a state in a historical land of somebody else's. And now they're already putting the word Palestine, which again, we're going to prove it more and more and more to see which one is more historic than other. And then the Zionism is a nationalist political ideology that called for creation of Jewish state and now supporting. So at least they got some of the point right? That Zionism is a political ideology or something. And again, we could go back and forth. But the idea, now imagine you have two students on campus arguing what Zionism is, and both of them, in a sense, correct at least about one thing, is that both of them calling for establishment of the state of Israel. One says by any means, another one says by determination in that specific land. So there's some truth to it, to both of it, but then how they got to it becomes a little bit more challenging. And then when we're talking about what was there before, it's also Al Jazeera offers that Palestine was there before anything else. Now the Webster Dictionary, an international movement originally for the establishment of Jewish national or religious community in Palestine, and later for the support of the modern Israel. So at first it was to create a state, and now it's just for the supporting of the modern state. So now you could see why when you talk about Israel, sometimes people are saying, oh, wow, it's complicated. But if you look at through all of these things, I would say this is all a Western way of explaining with words what Israel is. And not most of it actually lands when we start thinking about from the Sephardic perspective. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So what do we know about Zionism? We're not going to go delve into it because we want to focus on things that you won't be able to really see it online. But most of these things that we're going to see here in this section, you'll be able to read it online. You'll be able to find it. But what do we know about Zionism? What we know today, and most of you know, and again, this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? Like the outside, what people might know. Story about Dreyfus, right? The French army officer who was accused selling military secrets to to Germans and was sentenced to life imprisonment. And as he was, brought in outside, there were people screaming death to Jews, and that's the moment where Theodor Herzl heard about it. And at that moment, he realized that regardless where are you and who you are you religious, not religious, it doesn't matter. The uh, and anti-Semitism, it exists, and that's where Theodor Herzl tried to figure out to create a Jewish problem and tried to figure out how to get rid of anti-Semitism. And one of his ideologies was, if we remove everybody to one specific location, maybe people will hate us less. Which, in a sense, he was wrong in that particular thing. And then we also, when we talk about Israel or Zionism, it's also the Holocaust comes into play. Okay, there was a death of the 6 million Jews in World War II, and therefore now the Jewish people needed a home. There's a huge refugee crisis in the world. We have to identify a way to bring all those refugees, and that's the narratives that the other side also learning about when they talk about Zionism or Jewish people. Balfour Declaration of the announcement of the states, the Six-Day War. And usually when you talk about Israel, there's always these conversations about, oh, the UN resolution in 1946, oh, the Israel Declaration of Independence in 1948, the War of Independence. And you have all of these, dates and information that it's usually showcasing out there when you talk about Zionism, when you talk about Israel. But the question is always that I always like to ask is, how did Jews ended up in Israel in the first place? So before, everything else that's happened in the world, in the modern world, how did we ended up there? So I'm gonna kind of go really skim through it because like I said, we want to do in a short amount of time, maximum amount of information. So in Lech Lecha, God told to Avram, go forth and find the land, right? There's a whole concept of leave your family, leave your parents, and go to the land that I'm going to show you. What was the land that he showed him? That God showed Avram was Israel. All right, in Vaigash, Yosef reveals himself to his brothers. He says, okay, my brothers and my father household who were in the land of Canaan have to come to me. So basically, now we're saying this is the first exodus of the Jewish people from the Israel. So now Yaakov takes all of his family and brings to Egypt because there was devastation there was Russian words coming into my head, but basically the story goes into it there where they needed to make sure that there was hunger. Here you go. There was hunger, right? So there was a hunger, and they needed to come to Egypt in order to be saved. So in Vaigash, we see clearly that the Jewish establishment was in Israel. So there's no Palestine at this specific moment in there, and that's where they are. And then in Shmot, which is last week's parsha, it talks about the burning bush, and then the God comes to Moshe and says, "I've come to you down to rescue for them to Egypt and bring them out of that land and the land of flowing milk and honey." But basically, God tells Moshe, "Okay, now you have to bring them back to the land where Yaakov took them out." So now there's a whole conversation about, hey, first you have the land that was gifted to you. Another one, you left that land because it was a hunger, and now you have to come back. So that's how we ended up in Israel in the first place, right? And then when we came there, we had all these 12 tribes. Again, that 2 weeks ago, we read about all of this tribes. And look, tribe Manasseh is there as well. So I could technically go and claim my land. Just kidding. But if you see how big it is, and if you're looking at all of those different proclamations, most of the gods, Reuven and Manasseh land is not even part of that agreement. So then what is Sephardic lands of Zionism then? Right? So you're saying, Manasseh, you're telling me, okay, you give me like a biblical information, but what if people don't believe in Torah or the old, the Torah and Old Testament, and they might say, so how are we connected to it? So what's Sephardic lens of it? So when I ask you a question, and that would be a question that I would ask, and you could type, you could type it in as a question if you want. But the idea was, when do you think the Zionism, the true Zionism, began? So is it during the time of the Holocaust? Is it during the time when Theodor Herzl saw what's going on and he kind of was innovative enough to come up with this idea? Is it started before? Well, when, if you want to pinpoint at what specific moment the whole concept of Zionism happened. So some may argue, oh, it happened when Moshe brought Jewish people back to Israel. I would argue that it's not. That wasn't the time of Zionism because people didn't even know where the land they're going to go into. They had to send spies to figure out and understand. Others may say, oh, it's when when God told him, Lech Lecha, go. I would argue, no, that wasn't the concept of Zionism because he didn't even know where the God will tell him the land. He also told him, go to the land that I'm showing you where it's going to be. So the whole concept of Zionism didn't even begin during that whole period of time. I would truly say that the whole time of the Zionism happens in 586 BCE. That was after the destruction of the first Jewish temple. And that was the moment when when people were kicked out from that land, they really wanted to come back. And how do we know that? If we go through the early history, right, there was two kingdoms separated from two different sides. The northern kingdom was under the Assyrian Empire. And that's where the term 10 lost tribes come from. The south side, which is Judea kingdom, was conquered by Babylon, by Nebuchadnezzar. And then he destroyed the first Jewish temple and sent the Jewish people into current day of Iraq. And then the Persian Empire emerges. And that's where we see the first time of Zionism actually happening. When Cyrus the Great says, I will allow Jewish people and any other people to go back to their temple and to go back and to their own old ways. So the small amount of Jewish people, small percentage of them went back to rebuild the second temple. The vast majority stayed or continued going eastward and ended up in Meir and Baal. That was the outskirts of the Persian Empire. That's where my family actually ended up, and never will be able to go back and build a second temple. We were ended up in this specific area. So Bukhara is right here, Samarkand. That's where I was born and lived. So we have Meir and Baal. That was the outskirts of the first Jewish settlement, far, far, far east during that whole period of time. So let's try to prove this. Let's try to prove that the Zionism didn't really build or created or offered during the more modern time, and Zionism actually existed back in the day. So, and that's the Sephardic lens to it. So while living in Meir and Baal, Jewish community at that time called themselves Bnei Israel or Israel. They did not identify as Bukharian, Ashkenazi, Hungarian, Persian Jews. They said, we were Bnei Israel, we were children of Israel. They could refer it to Yaakov himself, or they could have referred to the land of Israel itself. Okay? Then we also see in Psalm 137, we see the writings by the river of Babylon, which is in Iraq, right? There we said and we wept that because we want to go back to Zion. And also, we also have this passage when people get married, if I forgot you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. So there's a whole conversation about Jerusalem and returning and coming back. Then we also have Benjamin Tudela in 12th century. When he went on a tour, he was a vlogger, I would say, right? He says, hence 5 days from Samarkand, which is a great city of confine of Persia, and it lives 50,000 Israelites. And Rabbi Avadia is Nasi of their appointed head. He didn't call them Jews. He didn't call them Mizrahi, Sephardic, Ashkenazi, Bukharian, any of those terminologies. He said Israelites. So in 12th century, we see another kind of conversation when we're talking about Jews, we're talking about Israel. So then the untold story of Mizrahi Jews or the Sephardic Jews or the Sephardic lands, we're gonna go into into it right now. So after the Muslim conquest in 636, Jewish communities returned to Israel, establishing significant settlements over the centuries in the cities such as Sfarad, Tiberias, Jerusalem, Jaffa, Haifa, Gaza, and Hebron included. Okay, during the medieval period and beyond, notable Sephardic leaders immigrated to Israel, and we'll look at most of these scholars and notable leaders as well. The central to pray holiday celebration of poetry of Sephardic and Mizrahi communities has been earning for the return of the land of Israel. And according to the historian Daniel Elazar, before 1948, Sephardim accounted for about 1/8 of the world Jewish population. They provided about 1/6 of the immigrants to the Palestine. Right? That's what he's writing in his own words. But then look what's happening. Bukharian Aliyah, the Bukharian Jewish community moving to Israel, beginning in 1830, with the community expanding around 2,500 individuals by 1936, and predominantly settling in Jerusalem, establishing Bukharian Jewish quarter in Shchunat Bukhari. Then we also have a Yemenite Aliyah between 1881 and then 1914. About 10% of Yemenite Jewish population immigrated to Israel. But what usually we hear about Yemenite Jews, what do we hear? About the situation that happened, the Operation of Magic Carpet, when between 1948 and 1950, 48,000 Yemenite Jews were airlifted to Israel and kind of was saved. So we usually hear that story, but we don't hear what happened with the Yemenite Jews who came and established Kerem Chatemanim, right, in Tel Aviv. Then we also have Kurdish Aliyah beginning in 1895. So reason I'm showing all of this to you, because every single of these aliyot and every single time you see all of these people are moving to Israel way before the World Zionist Congress gathered and made a Zionist as a concept of returning back to Israel. So the Jewish people were returning back to Israel regardless. And I could show you more, right? The Iraqi Aliyah actually happens after the establishment of the Jewish state, and that was the moment where a lot of Jewish people were kicked out. They say about 850,000 Jews from the Arab lands were exiled and came to Israel during that whole period of time. And then we have North Africa Aliyah, again, also between 1955 and 1957, approximately 62% of Israel immigrants came from North African countries. And in 2014, November 30th was implemented as Mizrahi Heritage Month as response to that, right? So we could see the more and more people are wanted to go there before, again, the World Zionist Congress gathered and wanted to kind of create this concept. So Sephardic and Mizrahi Zionists. I would call them Zionists, but because look, we're talking about Ramban, right? Ramban, he was born in Spain, but then in 1270, he was in Israel and he died in Israel and wanted to be buried in Israel. Okay? Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of Shulchan Aruch, was born in Spain, but passed away in Israel and buried in Tzfat. So we could see all of these people. Shlomo HaLevi Al-Kabetz also was born in Spain, but died and buried in Tzfat. He's actually the author of the famous Shabbat song that we sing, Lecha Dodi. So also Sephardic Jew wanted to go back to Israel. And even look, you might say Menashe, but this is all from Spanish, from Spain. Look, we have a rabbi in Tashkent who was born in Tashkent in 1855. 1914, he buried in Jerusalem. He moved there, he lived there, and then he died and buried in Jerusalem. We also have Musayev family, right? His daughter was actually the first lady of Iceland, his granddaughter. And he was born in 1852 in Bukhara, lived in Israel in 1922, was buried there. Rabbi Shimon Chacham, born in Bukhara in 1843, died in Jerusalem, 1910. So the question becomes, Rabbi Shimon Chacham was, the one of the biggest reasons why the Persian community, the Iranian community, and the and a Jewish community had this beautiful synergy because he translated the Persian poetry into Hebrew and then the Hebrew Jewish books into Farsi and created a synergy of people having access to each other's educational materials. Rabbi Mani Borochov, 1888, passed away in 1977 in Jerusalem. So, and this is actually the front picture that you saw where Manny Borochov is with Ben-Gurion receiving face-to-face meeting in 1965 because he approached him and wanted to make sure that they to talk about Bukhara community and how can we advance Bukhara community in Israel. So what is this trying to show you is that all of these people are moving and wanted to be in Israel because that's the concept of Judaism and Zionism. It's ingrained. It's a fundamental. It's a fundamental piece of our identity to be connected to Israel. So when Sephardic Jews looking at Israel, this is the way they look at Israel. So we could call it and we could separate it. Some people do that. Oh, there's a political Zionism, there is a religious Zionism, there's all these different Zionisms. Or the way I would like to suggest is that the whole concept of Zionism is going back to Israel and and being part of Israel and supporting Israel in any shapes or form that you're doing it, right? You're sending money, you want to be you're serving army, going and learning there, you're going and living there. It could be any of those different things. However, I have many discussions with friends of mine who believe that they're Ashkenazi side of it, who believe that if you're Zionist, you have to go and live there, and that's your support, and that's then really proves that you're Zionist. So from the Sephardic lens, no, you could send money and not live there. You could just serve army and come back and do all of those different things, and that's your Zionism. However, the idea that all of us would want to be there, or one day or the other, that's the essential part of Zionism from the Sephardic lens. We're not going to go into this more, so I just kind of leave you with that, and then we could take some questions now. And if you want to be connected to our page, this is an opportunity to do it. My followers grew much more from this moment, which is great. And then yes, we also have a heritage trip to Uzbekistan that's coming up. That's going to be in July, July 26th, I believe. And if you like more information, that's my Instagram page and that's my email. You'll be able to connect with us. Okay, Audrey.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay. So yeah, if you have questions, please put them in the question and answer part of the Zoom meeting. I'm curious to know what is the difference and why do you think there was a difference between your typical American Ashkenazic college student and the Mizrahi students on college campus and their different reaction to 10-7 on the college campuses. We worked quite a bit with the students from the Soviet Union and noticed that they were quite Zionistic in and they were not protesting, and they were the ones that were the leaders. There's an amazing organization called Club Z that really focuses on the students from the Soviet Union. So why do you think the Mizrahi students had a different reaction than your typical Ashkenazic student on the college campus?
Yeah, so I would say that if we have to group people, which I don't usually like to do, but for the sake for the better of argument, I would group an immigrant groups, Sephardic groups, and I would say Ashkenazi Orthodox groups would probably be under the same umbrella of protecting or unapologetically speaking for Israel and defending Israel. And I think one of the biggest reasons, because you mentioned about the Russian-speaking Jewish community, an immigrant community and Sephardic community and Mizrahi community is because we are actually not that far away from the immigration, right? So it's either we have students who were born here but their parents did not, so it's still fresh in their memory of understanding what does it mean to be when the government is against you or when the people is against you and or when the police shows up and moving their eyes away when bandits are coming to your house and doing certain things. So it's very fresh in the memory of the Soviet Jews. It's very fresh in the memory of Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews, and it tend to be also for some interesting reason fresh in the Orthodox community as well. But because they're understanding that the governments can switch in a matter of a day. And I think we today see what could happen, right? A president of Venezuela, it's not there anymore. Like, so you could see things could switch so quick. And therefore, people who have more sensible, sensitive to those type of things, be able to understand that much, much easier and quicker rather than when people live in America and feel so safe that they don't even understand. And if somebody tells them, hey, Jewish people control all the banks, and they're like, yeah, yeah, we're so cool, that's who we are. That's actually an anti-Semitic trope, and it's not a compliment, right? So the Soviet Jews be able to be more sensible for that. And then the Sephardic community is also they be able to sense it much, much quicker.
Mm. So it's a memory of persecution closer to your personal identity that you think was the impetus for the more support for Israel from the Sephardic community. Okay, there are a couple of questions.
I could also, I mean, just to speak from the perspective of the Sephardic community in particular, um, I think it's also ingrained because I don't want to kind of group with the other, I don't want to speak for the other communities, but I think it's also ingrained, like for example, for myself, I always knew about Israel. Living in Uzbekistan, I grew up in Uzbekistan. I lived there until the age of 14. I knew about Israel. I knew that this is our country. We always prayed. We always, when we did prayers, we always talked about it, Israel, oh, next year in Jerusalem,
Mhm.
without even knowing where is that on the map.
Mhm.
So I think the whole concept of that, it's also interesting. I remember the first time I went to Israel was in 1993, and I went to uh, my great grandfather at that time. And I told him I'm going to Israel, and he was so happy for me. He never been to Israel, but he told me about all the different um, cemeteries that I should go to, where the Avram is buried. Should go to Hebron. He knew all of that information without stepping foot in Israel. So I think that shows a lot about the connection, our connection to the land of Israel. And that's some questions that I ask on college campuses. I say, how many people do you know? And I don't want to kind of go into that detail, but how many people do you know that die? How many Palestinians do you know that die in Qatar and send their dead into the land of Israel and bury their dead there? Or how many of Palestinians die in other parts of the world or in America and send their dead there? I know many Jewish people do that. Um, but I don't know any of people from the other side are doing it. So there is a fundamental connection there, regardless of what the politics and borders and anything else that we're talking about. And that's how I was brought up from day one. And I also remember the moments where I I knew about that something is happening in Israel, or whether it's a terrorist attack or something else, without watching on TV. How would I know that? It's because in my school environment, people are saying certain things, the teachers are responding in a certain way. And I would always approach my mom and I say, Mom, did something happen in Israel? She said, How did you know? I said, I don't know, but like, let's turn on the TV. You turn on the TV and you see something happen in Israel. So I knew about situations in Israel before I watched TV, but people around me knew about it before even me. So that's the interesting concept how sometimes people are very obsessed about that specific country.
Right. Um, So there's a number of questions here just about the culture. People are very interested in the culture that you're describing. So, okay, here are a couple of questions around that. So first, are the mountain Jews of Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan, am I saying that?
You're
Actually,
doing good. Azerbaijan, yes.
Actually Bukhara Jews? Are them?
Good question. So the Jews, mountain Jews of Azerbaijan and Bukharian Jews, we come from that same. Remember, I talked about the first temple was destroyed, and then everybody were in the Persian Empire. So when we all were in the Persian Empire, we lived under the Persian Empire for a very, very long time until Persian Empire was split into pieces, and when that happened, and there were persecutions in different parts of the Persian Empire, people start moving different directions. So my family ended up in Central Asia and went further east. The Azerbaijani Jews went on a I would say on the west north side of it, and when everything else got split up and connected again, that's where those identity were formed, right? The Azerbaijani is part of, they're not the same as Bukharian because they kind of formed their own identity being in Azerbaijan. And we formed our identity living in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and those parts of the world. So, in a sense, we have a same lineage of where we come from. We would speak the same Farsi language, but our Farsi languages have a little bit of different shape and form. So, Azerbaijani, they have Azeri language. We have a Bukharian language, and then the Farsi has different types of Farsi, Judea Farsi in different parts of the city. Teherani, Mashari, Shirazi, everybody has their own type of Farsi, Persian, Jewish language.
Mhm. Another question. Somebody's asking a question about the headgear of the Jewish women from Bukhara and Yemen. Yeah, are there any books that you can point them to explain the ritual garb?
Sure. So there's gonna be a whole um выставка. Wow, my English is running away from me. Exposition, right? There's going to be like of different headgears of the Jewish women from all around the world, and I'm also helping be part of it and curating it. So if you send me an email, I'll be able to direct you once we have that information out there. And also in some of the resources, maybe I could include some of this.
Where is that going to be? Is it going to be an
It's going to
event
be in New Jersey,
in New Jersey? Okay,
in America. Yeah.
in America. Okay. Okay, so there's a question about an anonymous attendee asked, maybe I missed it, but why did Bukharian Jews not called Uzbeki Jews?
Yes, good question. So you didn't miss it because I didn't really went into it as much. Um, is going to answer this question. Okay, so if you go to part one, you go into more depth of it. But to make it simple, the simple is that the fact that we are coming from the Bukharian Emirate, and that's where the name comes from the Emirate that consisted of many different kingdoms together, and not because we come from the city itself.
Okay. Um, are there religious and cultural customs unique to Bukharian Jews? Did a little
Yes and
bit of
no. Yes and no. I think there are minhagim, the traditions. There are certain traditions that we have that are there are a little bit different. The way I always like to look, instead of separating people of like what's your differences and similarities, is the values they will put forward and backward, right? So there's certain communities that put certain values on top, and there's other communities that put other values on top. So because of the value system, we more obsessed about certain things and other communities are not so much, and therefore it looks like we're having a little bit of different customs. But there are obviously on the garment, on the food, on the culture, on where we went, the way we do with the wedding, the steps of how we do certain things in the synagogue, what goes first, what goes second, and how we do it. Do we sitting, do we standing? During the kaddish, for example, we
Mm,
sit and not stand. Like there's all these different variations of the customs, but overall it doesn't go against the Torah laws. It's usually within the parameters of the halachic laws, and then there is a deviation of the emphasis on specific traditions that may look that we are doing it or practicing it a little bit differently.
So to dovetail to that question, there's a question of the Bnei Yisrael, the Jews from India. Is there any kind of connection between them, the Jews of India, and the Bukharian community?
Yeah, I always like to say that. So, like, before we were all split up, we were part of a same Jewish community that had 12 tribes. Then the 12 tribes got dismantled by the 10 tribes all around the Assyrian Empire, and then the rest of the tribes kind of was in a Persian Empire. So we all, including the Ashkenazim, we were all part of this one big Jewish community. And what separated us is the fact that we did not have access to the certain things that we needed to continue do Jewish things, and the lack of access created those subgroups of the Jewish communities. But yes, the Jews of India usually refer themselves as Bnei Israel because that's how they would refer themselves and call themselves. Bukharian Jews for quite a long time in a period of history would identify themselves the same way. And I would argue that most of the Jews at that time would identify as Bnei Israel because that's the tribe that we come from. We come from the Bnei Israel until it got a little bit lost in transactions.
Here's another question. What is the difference between Bukharian Jews and Georgian Jews?
So it's going back to what I answered about the Azerbaijani Jews. So the difference is because when the wars and persecutions were happening in the Persian Empire, the Jewish communities moved into different directions, and then those regions were conquered by others, and that's what made the Georgian Jews become part of the Georgians, and then the Kafkazi Jews part of the Kafkaz, and then Bukharian Jews part of the Bukharian Emirate. And then many other communities are kind of split up and separated at that specific moment.
Okay, so I have a question for you in terms of the Jews that came prior to 1948 from all these different areas. They never wanted to establish a political entity called Israel, called Palestine. They were living in Palestine. They were living in the area, but what was their life like living in Palestine pre-1948? And why do you think the Ashkenazic Jews came in to really form a political movement that then became the State of Israel? And the Sephardic Jews and the Mizrahi Jews didn't seem to go in that direction.
I think there's a big emphasis between do you wait for the Mashiach and then the third temple will happen and everything will exist? And for Sephardic, a community was, all right, we're going to move into that direction to speed up the process. The Ashkenazi mindset said, no, we need to legitimize this situation and then things will happen. So, like, yes, we trust that God will do it, but we need to help him out. Or we need to be part of the process, and that's our way of doing it. While the Sephardim said we need to be there physically, and that's what's gonna make the process faster. And that also goes back to what I teach about when we talk about Sephardic community, how they organize in America versus Ashkenazi community, and how we did it back then. And I did a whole study on that, where the Ashkenazim back in the day, the way they would organize, it was a self-governed communities, and very rarely even like did certain things with each other, but they were really staying in their own type of a shtetls, and that was the form of organizing. While the Sephardic communities had similar type of organizing structure, but they were more cosmopolitan and well-traveled, and would be okay to marry and bring a Persian Jew from Iran and marry her and bring her to Uzbekistan, or from Iraq or from Syria, and would kind of marry other Jewish communities, and that would be like normal and okay. Coming to America, everything changed. In Hebrew, they say afuch, right? Everything went upside down. So the Ashkenazim said, no, we're not going to be in our own shtetls. Let us be, let us create organizations. Let us make it more official. So we here, we exist, and we're gonna open up to everybody else. While Sephardim said, okay, what's going on over here? We're gonna be more on our own. We're gonna create our own institutions. We're gonna create our own infrastructure, and we're gonna stay within ourselves, and that's it, because everything else is too confusing. We don't want to be part of this large, big United States of America. We want to be part of our own system. So similarly, when in Israel, same thing happened. When the European Jews, the concept of the European ideology coming from the West, if you look, most of the institutions in the world that we have are coming from the West. It's very rarely you see an institution from the East. So one of the reasons is because that's how West operates. They operate in formalities, in documentations, in contracts, creating and building infrastructure. The East, usually it's more about, the soul, the connection, and building, Na'aseh Nishma. You do it and then you figure out how it's going to be. So I think that might be the reason why when you saw that all those aliyot are coming in, they established a quarter, they established a neighborhood, they established a street, they built a synagogue. That was it. It wasn't the idea of changing the whole world. They just wanted to do a little bit dips there, while the Ashkenazim kind of went all out, which is also, I'm not blaming, I'm just saying there's a different ways of approaching the same type of a problem, and that's what we saw with the state of Israel.
Okay, there's probably a lot more to unpack in that answer and a lot more to understand about the different cultures and the different ways in which Jewish communities form. Is there anything in the last minute or two that you want to leave us with that you haven't touched on?
I want to leave you with something interesting that I'm working on right now, and kind of like a teaser. I'm giving you, this is the first group I actually mentioning to. How many people we have? Okay, it's pretty good, big group. Um, I'm I'm actually working on an article now where it's where we are going to be talking about what would happen if Israel would be built and created by the Sephardic establishments, by the
Okay.
Sephardic community, and looking from that perspective and understanding of kind of like which areas we would leave out, which not, and kind of that's the idea. What Israel would look like if the people who would be the founders would be from the Sephardic world.
Okay. Interesting. All right.
So
We'll look forward to that article. We'll look forward to that. So, Menashe, if you people will get in the follow-up email ways to contact you and more information. There was somebody wants to know more about the New Jersey headgear exhibit, where it is, and all that. So we'll put that. Hopefully, you'll have some information for us.
yes, I would need to find out information. If it's more
Okay.
official, I will share it. But you
Okay.
can always follow my Instagram, be on our mailing list, and we'll share with Scholar Circle as stuff are coming in, and you'll be able to share it with your
Thank you. Okay.
listeners and
Thank
learners.
you so much. Your two lectures were so informative and just wonderful, and you're an amazing
Thank you.
champion for the Sephardi community and the Mizrahi community. And thank you so much for your work, and keep up all that energy and great work that you're doing.
Thank
So our next Scholar Circle will feature Dr. Naya Leket on the clash of narratives, Zionism beyond politics and Jewish education. On Tuesday, January 27th, we're going back to the 7 p.m. Eastern Time, the evening lecture. That's on Tuesday, January 27th. So thank you all for attending this lecture today. And thank you again, Menashe, for all your work. And please keep in touch with us, and people will keep in touch with you. And we'll see you all soon. Thank you so much.
And to those of you listening, participate and donate and support Chaim Mitzvah. They're doing an amazing work and bringing all these great speakers. I really appreciate being part of this as well. Thank you.